Hey everyone, this is Carlos. I'm the founder and CEO at Product School. Today I'm here with a tremendous product executive. His name is PJ Linarducci. He's the Chief Product Officer at Thumbtack. Welcome, PJ.
Thanks for having me, Carlos. Glad to be here.
Good to have you on the show. We have so many things to talk about. I was taking a look at your background, and as many other product leaders, it's not straightforward. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and how you found your way into product.
Sure. Well, I'm currently the Chief Product Officer at Thumbtack. Thumbtack is a technology company that helps millions of homeowners take care of their largest asset, their home. And through that, we help tradespeople, mostly in the home services field, grow their small businesses. Prior to this role, I spent the last decade or so in a variety of roles at Facebook or Meta, starting on partnerships roles and then moving into product roles, and then ultimately sort of supporting product and engineering cross-functional teams.
And before all of that, I see that you also worked at PayPal. You were senior manager, new ventures. Curious to know what that is. Business operations. You've done a few other things before product. So what was kind of that inspiration to get you to product?
Yeah, I started even before I started working, I was in undergrad. I studied electrical engineering and computer science, so I had a technical bend. But I got caught up in the lore and the popular thing to do was move to New York City and put on a suit and tie and go work at a bank or at a consulting shop. And so I sort of lost my way a little bit and got swept up in that and spent several years in a consulting firm. And I learned a ton. Learned a ton about business. I learned a ton about just being effective in the workplace. Learned a ton about people. But ultimately, I realized I missed working on technology. And so after a brief hiatus in grad school for an MBA, I decided to plug into Silicon Valley and bounce around at some small early stage startups, then PayPal, and then really found a footing at a small 3,000 person company called Facebook that was accelerating quickly, and spent the next 10 years there.
10 years at Facebook. And what was your first role there?
I started in a partnerships role. And so, coming from consulting and an MBA, trying to fit myself into one of the sort of pegs as a peg in one of the slots in Silicon Valley was hard. There's no sort of concept of a general manager role or a business role in early career stages. And so I try to figure out where I could fit in and add value. And I tried business operations and analytics. And then ultimately at Facebook, I started in a partnerships role. And at Facebook, the payment partnerships and commerce partnerships it started off largely around sort of vendor management. So Facebook had to collect revenue and payments from users and small businesses in 180 different countries. And that required a patchwork of different vendors. And so I started sort of leading a small team to manage all those vendors, optimize them, get the portfolio right. And what we realized was to really get the most out of our partners and our vendors, we needed to change the product experience to really take advantage of what they had to offer. And so I started moonlighting in sort of a PM function. I sort of said, how can I my goals are to make the system run as smoothly as possible. What could I ask of my engineering partners to make that work? And as opposed to just pulling the lever of contracts and partner meetings, how can I actually take better advantage of new features or different ways to call APIs, et cetera? And started working directly with some engineers. And as we started to have more and more impact, the GM of the group sort of said, hey, why don't you take a bigger and bigger swath of engineers to work closely with the partnerships team and build out better product experience. And that ultimately snowballed until I get asked to make the jump over to product full time.
I love that you said about adding value, because these days working in product sounds very cool. Definitely cooler than 10 years or 15 years ago. The cool thing to do was actually consulting and others. But it's definitely different. And I saw how a lot of tech companies start hiring consultants and gave them roles in strategy or in business operations just to fix complex problems. But there was a gap between those unclear problems and with engineers and designers and try to turn those problems into beautiful experiences for the user. And the part around adding value first, moonlighting, and earning that credibility, I think it's something that I just want to highlight because I don't want this to go in silent. It's just obviously, like I always say, the leaders lead way before they get the promotion. There's no luck that suddenly you were there at the right. I mean, maybe you were there at the right place at the right time, but you were also putting in the effort.
Yeah, people often ask me, people outside of sort of technical roles ask me, how do you get into product management? And my advice to them is always to, I'm biased by my personal experience, and so I play that out, and I say, look, it's hard to sort of stick out from the crowd if you have no product experience from someone who's hiring for a PM role. The way to sort of introduce yourself to that and ease your way in is, if you're in a technology company, find a product and engineering team that's working closely to your field of work where you have expertise, and find ways to partner with them to make their lives better, to help them achieve their goals for their end users, or ask for their help on something that you're working on, and find ways to kind of work together. And through that, you'll learn the basic approaches and the rhythms of working with product teams and engineering teams. And through that, you can demonstrate value and then sort of very intentionally put yourself in the right place at the right time. It doesn't happen by accident. You do the right things, you end up in the right place at the right time.
So for how long did you work as a PM in an IC capacity before you were charged with a larger team of PMs?
Ironically, I didn't, and it was actually a source of insecurity for me for a number of years. So I went from managing a team of partnership people to managing a team of PMs. And it was very humbling because I had to act as a leader for them. And I had less experience doing their job than they did. And so I had to really lean on the back and forth of learning and value. So I had to create as much value for them as possible to be respected as their manager, and be respected as a leader who can point the direction, without having the day-to-day execution expertise that they had. And so I had a lot I could teach them from sort of the business perspective and other angles. But I had a lot to learn in terms of the day-to-day operations of product. I was able to observe it from the outside, but it's one thing to observe from the outside. It's another thing to do it on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And that's also unusual based on my own experience. I've seen a lot of PMs grow the ladder and start as ICs and then become people managers. So in your case, you joined from the top, inherit a team of PMs without the same level of PM experience that they had. So how did you earn? I mean, you got the authority because someone put you there, but how did you earn that influence?
Yeah, I love this topic of influence versus authority. I had deep passion around leading with influence versus authority. In my example, at that point in time, my influence came from a content expertise. So I was leading. I spent the last 10 years working on payments and commerce infrastructure in a variety of different companies. I had just come from leading a payments and commerce partnerships team, and I stepped in to lead the payments and commerce infrastructure product team. So while I didn't have the depth of expertise on the function, I had a lot of depth of expertise on the content. And so I was able to leverage that to set strategy and set vision, and lean on the PMs on my team to do what they did best, which was how to take that strategy and vision, translate it into product features and delivery. But building on your question about influence and authority, one of the things that leading through influence is one of the skills I most value in PMs. And it's one of the things that I very consciously try to hold on to in my current role. I have the opportunity in my current role to lead through authority. So I could use the opportunity to sort of decree decisions. And I view that as an absolute last resort, because decreeing in a direction only gets you so far as the specific decision in front of you. It doesn't build agency and buy-in on the decision that you're making. And if you really want to see a decision all the way through to impact, you need all the people that touch that decision to really buy in and believe in it and root for it to succeed. And so whenever possible, even when I have the opportunity to make a decision through authority, I always try to take the extra time and put the extra effort in to lead through influence, because you get much better outcomes that way.
Yeah, there are only so many times you can pull the card of the authority, and if possible, you don't want to use it ever.
Yeah.
That's at the end of the day, you can't do this by yourself.
We used to have a rule that you can never say we're doing this because the CEO said so. It was the most surefire way to get people to resent or be cynical about the decision. And so I still carry that. I still carry that with me. So I never want anyone to say we're doing something because PJ said so. I want them to say we're doing it because of these fundamental first principles reasons, and we're doing it because it's good for the user. Oh, Carlos, I lost your sound for a second.
Oh, yeah, I was saying that another example that I also try to avoid is having people say, "Well, we're doing this because that's why we used to do it. Like someone else was here before, and we were just following."
That's right. That's right. You don't want to reinvent every wheel, but at the same time, you need to be a first principle thinker and not just fall into those traps.
So let's talk about those principles and your own way of operating. I can imagine you learn best practices from previous experiences at different places, different products within Meta. And Meta is famous for being one of those pioneering companies in empowering product managers, not just engineers. So tell me a bit more about like those sources for you, as well as how you were able to put together your own recipe.
Yeah. I think there's lots of different archetypes. And so I challenge any image that there's one definition of what is a great product manager. I think you can add value in lots of different flavors, and people aspiring to be product leaders should really lean into their personal brand and what is their unique recipe that helps them deliver value to the team and stand out from the crowd. At Facebook, there was sorry about that. There were, one archetype is the sort of front end visual design PM who can really build beautiful experiences and almost sub in for design leaders. Another example is the platform PM who can really speak to developer experiences and get really deep into technical areas. And what I found what works for me is, I come from a get stuff done kind of a background. And so I built my brand on execution. And my personal philosophy is that strategy is absolutely necessary, but almost always wrong. And it has to be iterated and informed by user feedback over time. And so the most critical recipe for success on teams that I've worked on is not necessarily how perfect you can be on your strategy or your designs, but how quickly you can execute and pivot and learn from users. And so I really emphasize that with my teams of execution speed and execution rigor of like, if you succeed, great. But if you fail, we should at least feel like we put our best foot forward and we failed definitively. And then we can learn from that and take those learnings and pivot into a new direction. The worst thing you can do is fail and not know why and wonder, maybe we should just try again with a stronger approach, because that's sort of failing without the benefit of learning.
And I agree with you that there is no silver bullet. And even within the same company, different product teams could be operating under different methodologies or frameworks, however we want to call it. So I heard you talk about the execution rigor and you being a go get things done type of person. So tell me more about your own framework. And when you take a product team, what are some of those must-haves that you expect them to achieve, or like how you like for them to work together?
Yeah. I think there's a few ingredients to helping teams just execute really well. The first is sort of how you plan. So you need sort of top-down vision and coordination with bottom-up buy-in and context. The second is how you goal. You need really clear goals that encompass everything a team's going to do. So whether that be moving product metrics or paying down tech debt or improving design polish, if a team is going to work together and succeed and fail together, they have to share all the same goals across functions. A third is sort of how you track your progress. So having real-time data around how we're doing and feeding that back in to the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis. Your roadmap shouldn't be static. Your roadmap should react to what you've learned earlier in the cycle. Another one is how you actually execute during the week. So what are your rhythms to keep everybody informed, aligned, and moving quickly? How do you institute what I call minimum viable process so that everyone knows what to do and is very clear, but they're not bogged down in meetings all day? And lastly, how do you recognize performance and impact? How do you make sure that what's most important for the product team is reflected in your values, and how you recognize team members for their work?
One thing that I noticed that is happening with product teams as they become more relevant and as they become bigger, as they build more relationships with other teams, is that they need to be operationalized. Long gone are the days where the product manager is this visionary person that somehow came up with an idea and everybody else is going to figure that out. Right now, right now there's more science around it. You were talking about your own operational rigor framework. So as those product teams grow and they are not just made up of product managers, what type of support you need to ensure that you are refreshing your strategy, you are refreshing your goals, you are refreshing your roadmap, people are being working on the right outcomes, they're being rewarded as they make more progress, and all these logistical things that usually happen at the highest level, but now they also need to happen at a product level.
Yeah. There's just a lot of hygiene that goes in to running teams really well. And one of the interesting challenges, at Thumbtack and lots of places, is it's hard enough to coordinate with, and we call our technical group EPAD, Engineering, Product, Analytics, Design. And getting those four disciplines to work together is an art in and of itself. But that's often necessary, but not sufficient. In order for a product team to be effective, they also need to work with sales and marketing and finance and HR and legal and all the different parts that make a company function. And so we're actually running, it's a really interesting exploration right now. We're trying to figure out how do we maintain the agility and speed of execution of a technical team while bringing in all those other functional partners. And so it requires a lot of upfront thinking about how to design, how you plan, how you execute. And I think the most common pitfall here is either one, people don't appreciate that this is a piece of work in and of itself. Running a really crisp process often requires some headspace. And so that might require sort of a program manager, someone who can think about how to get things done really quickly. And another common pitfall is that people over-engineer the process. So if you go too far and you lay down all the documents to fill out and templates and the spreadsheets and the meetings to check in and dictate, Scrum for this and a weekly check-in for that and a stand-up for this, you end up applying the wrong tools to the wrong problem. And everyone gets bogged down in process over getting things done. And so I think it's really critical to get that perfect balance of what I call minimum viable process. And the minimum viable process is the amount of process that solves the pain points that the teams are feeling. So when a team has to do something over and over and over again and they have to reinvent the wheel, how do you templatize that so that they can run faster and not have to think from first principles on something that happens over and over again, but not go so far that you dictate process for process sake. And the last thing you want is your critical people just sort of filling out forms and checking boxes instead of building product and making decisions about what their team needs to get their tasks done.
Love that. I always thought of MVP as minimum viable product. And I'm also going to think about it in terms of minimum viable process.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Thumbtack. You grow your way up at Meta and now are Thumbtack, Chief Product Officer. When things go wrong, you cannot look right or left because that's on you. So tell me more about what is the main difference now working as the CPO with a seat at the table and then really having not just middle managers, but literally managers of managers, like a much bigger team, not just of PMs, but also engineers, designers, data, and like really, really influencing the overall business.
Yeah. One of the things that yeah, taking on this role has been incredibly empowering. I feel like I've learned more in the last 2 years than in the prior many years before that. It's been very much a jump in the deep end. And one of the things that surprised me, uh, one pleasant thing, was how quickly we can get things done if we make it a company level priority. And so you can't make everything a priority, but it's good to have that tool in your toolbox when you see a pattern emerging that's really holding back the company from being successful. It's an incredible opportunity to be able to bubble that up and propose a solution and get rapid buy-in and change culture and process and behaviors really broadly very quickly. So it's an exciting but also terrifying tool at one's disposal. Um, and one of the other learnings is that, I mean, we talked about authority versus influence, and I think the more you move into a position of authority, the easier it is to get sloppy and use that authority. And I have to sort of remind myself every day that I need to encourage a culture of challenging authority, that allowing the best ideas to bubble to the top and not letting people sort of do something because so and so says so. And I think that you affect that through subtle behaviors. So being careful to always ask your team members, regardless of level, for their opinions. Ask the most informed person for their opinion, not the most senior person. And be very careful to not conflate opinions with orders or decisions, so that sort of a passing comment or passing opinion doesn't become a decree.
That is tricky because, and I've made that mistake before. Try to be super open and say things such as, "Hey, my door is open," or "Ping me on Slack. Feel free to share." But I understand why some people who are not just directly reporting to me might be thinking, "Well, really, am I going to be punished? Do you really care?" So, wondering in your case, how do you balance having enough touch with reality and empowering individuals who maybe don't report to you directly so you can get the real?
Yeah. There's some standard practices like, skip levels and sentiment surveys and so forth. And those are sort of imperfect tools. But ultimately, I keep coming back to asking for what the user wants. Because what we want to do internally can easily be manipulated by hierarchies and seniorities and internal status. But when you come back to what are we hearing from our users, whether they be consumers or business customers, um, those users will call you out on what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, and that becomes a fact base on which you should make decisions. So if you're starting with a set of one person's opinions and reasoning from that, you can often be led astray. But if you start from what are we hearing from our users and what is the behavior that they're expressing in the product, it helps sort of even the playing field, and you start from a objective fact base and you reason from there.
So in your case, Thumbtack is a marketplace, right? And
Yep.
there's so many professionals who literally whose life depend on it. So how do you get to that end user, either the vendor, like the provider of the service provider, or the client? And like, what is the reaction when a chief product officer reaches out?
It's we do it through a number of different channels. Obviously, to do it at scale, you have to use talented user research folks. It's very easy to have someone who's not well versed in user research really butcher a user interview, and you can very much walk away with confirmation bias. The worst thing you can do is say, "Hey, would you be excited about this insert pet project feature?" And of course, the customer is going to say, "Yeah, that sounds like a great feature. I would totally use that." So you have to be really careful of that. So we have to use discipline and use the right ways of gathering feedback through in-product behavioral analysis, through at-scale quantitative research, and very carefully constructed qualitative research. One of the new challenges in a hybrid work environment is it's not as easy to bring in users for face-to-face interaction. And so we have to be very deliberate to create forums where we can do that. So we actually have a pro advisory council we call our small business owners, who work with our marketplace pros, and we actually have an advisory council, and that group is sort of representative of a number of different categories, and they come in periodically and share their thoughts about what we're doing well, and they're very vocal about what we're doing, what we could be doing better.
I like that. I think it's important to have access to different points of view and not just rely solely on the inner circle, because that's a tendency to group thinking eventually.
Yeah, it's very humbling. It's and it's the objective truth, and so it's really critical to anchor yourself on that whenever possible.
So I would like to spend a little more of time on how you think about your org as a product, especially in a marketplace product where you have supply and demand. So maybe we can start by learning more about like the size of your team and how you structure it.
Sure. Our technical teams are about 300 people across engineering, product, analytics, and or data science and design. And design includes product design, but also content design and user research. And I believe when you structure teams, the most important thing to get right is to construct what we call a pod. So there's different names for this in various companies, but it's this concept of a team that is small enough that they can communicate very seamlessly. It's been referred to as like a 2-pizza team. You can feed everybody with 2 pizzas, but large enough to really get things done. And another aspect of constructing a pod is to have the right ratios between the different disciplines. If your ratios between, say, product and engineering or engineering and design are out of whack, you end up with one discipline sort of running circles around the other, not being fully utilized, and one discipline always becomes the bottleneck. And so you're not running efficiently if you don't get those ratios right. And so at Thumbtack, anytime we think about org design, we try to, at least we start with the principle of create a full pod. So it might be, call it 8 to 12 engineers with 1 engineering manager, 1 product manager, 1 designer, 1 data scientist, and some partial support from user research or content. That's usually the recipe. You can then add in applied science, machine learning expertise, or marketing expertise, or sales expertise, depending on the content area. But it's really critical to get those disciplines in balance. Once you have that atomic unit, then you can that's your building block, and you can kind of take your total team size, divide by the size of your atomic unit, and that's the number of blocks that you can play with. And then the question becomes, how do you take your world and divide it into that number of blocks, which is the art of org design. And but we always try, and we don't get it perfect. You always have to compromise from the ideal structure to the pragmatic one, but we always try to revolve our org structure around that sort of pod concept.
Mm-hmm. And at a highest level, as you think about breaking down your platform into different products, you can imagine a product could be supply, a product could be demand, but there might be other internal products. So what are some of those groups?
I beyond just Thumbtack in general, I think there's 2 ways that you can divide up a product into team charters. One is by the component or the code base, and the other is by the user and the user problem. And different slices are useful for different contexts. When you're trying to build something from 0 to 1, you need an app, you need a website, you need a backend, you need an onboarding flow, you need a main flow, you need an email component, you need a login component. All those things don't exist. It's helpful to carve up by code base and say, I'm going to build this part and you build that part. And that's often how companies first structure. But when you get to a certain level of maturity, that structure can be a pitfall, because you can end up fine-tuning a component because that's your charter when it's not the area of the product that needs the most love. And so you can also sort of have artificial barriers in problem solving because you're too confined to your scope. And so as products mature, I propose to my teams that we organize around user problems. And so we take for granted that we have this big code base that kind of keeps the product running. And we have teams focus on, I'm going to solve this problem for this user base. And we're going to cut across all the different parts of the code base to solve that problem. And one of the most common org structures that I come across and I use often is what I call layer cake with candles, which is the marriage of the two. So some of your core components that kind of keep things running, you have horizontal layers, and a team owns the data center stack or the security stack. But then on top of that, you layer on vertical teams that really focus on a specific problem. Make this more efficient, make this customer base happier, help this customer base achieve more volume. And those teams cut across all the horizontals. And so they can be really gold on solving a user problem as opposed to making a component better.
PJ, I loved our conversation. Thank you so much for your time and sharing with all of us.
So much fun. Thanks for having me, Carlos.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.